Thank you everyone who's taking time to take our poll as we allow people to join. My name is Nicole Baxter and I'm the city's communications officer. I wanted to go over a few logistics to kick off this evening's workshop. First off, thank you everyone for making this happen. We appreciate you attending tonight. Under these circumstances, your city staff have worked hard to make this workshop happen. If you're unable to join us for the entire meeting, don't worry. We are recording this and we will have the recording up on the project's webpage as soon as we can. If you would like to ask a question during tonight's presentation, please use the Q&A function of our webinar. If you tap the bottom of your screen or hover your mouse, if you're on a computer, you'll see a Q&A button and you can click that to launch the Q&A feature. We'll be answering questions throughout after each section, as well as at the end. And with that, I'm going to invite our panelists to turn on their videos. All right, guys, this is your team for the evening. I'm going to be muting myself and kicking it over to Mary for introductions. Thanks again for joining us.
Welcome to the city's first Zoom webinar, everyone. My name is Mary Poole, and I am one of the project managers for the Multimodal Transportation Safety Program, affectionately known as the MMTSP. We're delighted to have you all here with us tonight, and we're looking forward to an interactive and informative community workshop in our new normal for now, this remote webinar. So first, I'd like to go over the agenda for tonight's webinar, introduce our panelists, and then we'll get this workshop rolling. So tonight, we're going to do a brief overview of what the MMTSP is, where we are in the process. I'll introduce you to our panelists, who will then take you through the online survey results, talk about the safety findings from our data assessment, introduce the prioritization process for the MMTSP, and then talk about implementation, next steps. We will after each section, we will pause to respond to any questions that have come in or that we have received earlier. And then we'll also do some quick interactive poll questions. As Nicole mentioned, we are archiving this webinar and it will be posted on the city's website. Everyone attending tonight will get a follow-up email with a link to the website as soon as we upload the material. And then we'll continue to take questions and input on the content of this webinar through April 30th via the email, which is mmtsp@citrusheights.net, or you can call us, but I'll go over that at the end, the ways that you can get a hold of us. And then we will post a summary of responses to the input at the end of that period, which would be after April 30th. So next slide. So just to give it a brief background, I wanted to take a moment to revisit the MMTSP program overview for those of you who might not be so familiar with the program. This program is funded by a Caltrans planning grant, and it is intended at its core to create an equitable and transparent process for the city to receive, analyze, and rank requests for neighborhood level traffic calming improvements. The process will also surface priority locations along our major corridors, and I just wanted you to know that these larger issues will be addressed through a different process outside of the neighborhood level prioritization process that is this program. So there are several aspects of the MMTSP program, including a comprehensive data review, among other things, identifying safety patterns, including hotspots throughout the city, community engagement, including multiple platforms from in-person meetings, pop-up events, social media, next door, you name it, we're trying to get the word out to you, and of course this webinar. It will result in a logical and community-shaped prioritization process. Tonight is part of that, you all helping us to shape that process. And then this will all lead us to the ability to plan and program funding for improvements on an annual basis, and then seek funding for larger, more cost-intensive projects down the road. Next slide. So then I also wanted to just take you through the MMTSP process and where we are in that timeline. So we kicked off the project in October. We held community meetings, the first workshop, and an orientation for our champions. We launched a online survey in December that ran through early February to inform the prioritization factors, which you will hear more about as we go through the webinar. And then the development of the initial prioritization framework has occurred from that. And then again, we'll be sharing some of that with you tonight. Where we are tonight is talking about the survey findings and what has come of the data review, and again, sharing the draft prioritization tool that we're working on. In the summer, the program is going to be coming into its final look and feel, and so we want to bring that back to you. So we'll be scheduling community workshop number 3, and then we're going to get your feedback on that program, which will help us finalize the program before we present it to the council in the fall. Once the City Council approves the program, then we'll begin implementation, and that includes recommending annual funding and seeking additional funds for the larger projects, as I mentioned. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, and she's going to walk us. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to introduce our panelists. So Leslie Bloomquist is my co-project manager. She's the city's principal civil engineer. Ian Conway, Sarah McMenemy, and Adam are our consultant team, so they will be providing information to you tonight about this process. Sean Gualco is the traffic sergeant of the city's traffic unit in the CHPD, and you already met Nicole Baxter, who is our communications officer, and then we also have Haley Reed in the background helping us make this whole thing work. So thanks again for your participation, and with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sarah to take us through the next section.
Thank you, Mary. So to inform the development of this prioritization tool, it's really important to the City of Citrus Heights that we make sure residents are helping decide what factors are going to be most important when prioritizing street safety projects. To do this and to build upon some of the input that we got from Community Workshop 1, the city put out a survey that ran for 2 months in late 2019 and early 2020 to ask residents a little bit more about how we should prioritize these projects. We had 352 folks from Citrus Heights respond to the survey. So if you're on this call right now and you took our survey, thank you so much. And thank you for being here today. By participating in this process, you're really helping us make streets in Citrus Heights safer for everyone. So the way that these questions were formed it was done very intentionally to make sure that the answers that we heard from residents directly feed into the development of the prioritization tool. So if you took that survey, that feeds directly into how this tool is being made. The survey had an overarching question, which was, how do we prioritize street safety projects? One of the first takeaways from this is that overwhelmingly residents told us that no change was not acceptable. There really needs to be an intentional way that we go about prioritizing street safety projects, and really made the case for the fact that this tool is needed. In terms of what residents did think was important for prioritization, crash trends really topped the answers in that category, followed closely by street attributes like volume, speed, or size, and then closely followed by the number of resident requests that were received on that specific street or that specific area. Folks who responded also felt that destinations in proximity to streets with concerns about safety, such as schools or community centers, were also important, as were projects that were identified in existing plans. Looking into the number one prioritized factor, which was crash trends, We asked residents within crash trends, what was the most important thing to look at? Folks decided that high-risk corridors and intersections was the most important, but highest occurring collision types and systemic hotspots and crash trends also were deemed to be very important. When looking at street attributes, folks told us that things like traffic speed and traffic volume were the most important attributes to look at when prioritizing street safety projects. In terms of destinations, respondents to the survey overwhelmingly indicated that schools were the most important destination to consider when looking into street safety projects. However, senior living facilities or activity centers were also important to people, as were parks and libraries. And a number of people also indicated that prioritizing safety around streets, around transit stops would also be important to them. We also asked folks a little bit more about how they travel around Citrus Heights now. The vast majority of people get around by car, but a fair number of people also walk and bike and take other modes of transportation. For folks taking car trips, the number one type of destination was to run errands or go shopping, but a fair number of people use their cars to commute as well. When looking at active trips like walking and biking, the majority of those trips were taken in Citrus Heights for leisure or for exercise. We also asked folks what they do in their neighborhoods now to champion safe streets. The vast majority of people who responded said that they do so by driving safely themselves, either within Citrus Heights or outside of the community. Um, a number of people also took more direct initiative by talking to their neighbors about street safety, participating in a neighborhood association or watch group, or by modeling safe street behavior themselves by wearing a helmet when they bike or using crossings when they walk in their neighborhood. We asked people to describe to us a little bit more about, what they actually do in their neighborhood to promote street safety. We got a lot of really good responses, anywhere from modeling good behavior themselves by using sidewalks and crossings to making their space within the community a bit safer for people walking by keeping their yard well lit, or even just having by to slow down. We also heard from people who had participated in coordinating their neighborhood watch or put out community newsletters that focused on the issue of speeding. So a lot of varied and engaged ways people are taking action to promote safe streets in their own neighborhood in Citrus Heights. We also asked for ideas on what the city can do to make streets safer in Citrus Heights. And we got, again, a whole range of answers, anything from infrastructure and implementation measures such as speed tables or speed humps to better signage or including a speedometer to help people be more aware of how fast they're going. Folks also asked for safety programs and things like education at schools and at community centers to talk to people a little bit more about safe driving, walking, biking, rolling in their neighborhood. And with that, we're going to take a little pause to see if there are any questions from you about street safety. And I believe we also have a poll question for you now as well.
And just a reminder, if you do have questions, make sure you type them into that Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. Sarah, we did have a question if people can still take the survey.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we are actually reopening the survey. So if you haven't taken it, please go do so. Or if you have any friends or neighbors within Citrus Heights who haven't taken it, who you could forward that on to, as many people as we can get to respond to this as possible, it really helps.
Great, thanks.
And that's going to be open through April 30th.
And Mary, we have a question regarding the number of responses received to date. How was the survey promoted and how are we getting the word out about that survey?
Thank you, Leslie. So anyone in the city's request database that has submitted a request for any type of traffic calming measure for which we had a mailing address or an email address received either a postcard in the mail about the survey and the project, or an email, or both. If we had both, they got an email and a postcard, and we encourage them to take the survey and share it with their friends and neighbors. We advertised it via Facebook, Nextdoor, through our neighborhood associations and neighborhood watch groups, and also asked them to help us spread the words. And then we did multiple news releases from our website using our e-notifier service. We use social media in all our different platforms that we have, and we also have included information about the project and the survey in our regular e-newsletters that go out each month from the city, and we'll continue to do that.
Great, thanks, Mary. And that is all the questions we have currently regarding the survey findings.
Great, thanks. And I think you can see there on your screen the results from the poll. So we're going to move on now to the findings from the safety analysis. So the safety analysis was conducted by Tool Design, who's part of the consultant team. And really this study looked at the data surrounding collisions within Citrus Heights for pedestrians, for bicyclists, and for vehicles. And looked at kind of how these collisions occurred, what type of collisions, looked at severity, and looked at location within the city. And the idea of this study is really to understand need through the lens of data. So we're going to run through some of those results now, starting with outcomes for pedestrians. So we looked at pedestrian crash frequency by year, as well as severity for pedestrian collisions. Over 90% of pedestrian collisions caused pain or injury, and 25% of these collisions were either severe or fatal. So this kind of identifies for us an area of serious concern. Streets with speed limits of 40 miles per hour accounted for over half of all pedestrian collisions. The majority of pedestrian collisions also occurred within a pedestrian crosswalk. However, any pedestrian collisions that occurred outside of a crosswalk tended to be more severe. We also looked at areas of concern within the city for pedestrian safety to identify specific hotspots where collisions are occurring more often, and identifying areas of concern such as Sunrise and Old Auburn Road, or Greenback and Auburn Boulevard. Then we looked at bicycle collisions, again, frequency by year, as well as severity for bicycle crashes. For bicycle collisions, we saw a lower incidence of fatality than for pedestrians, but we still saw that 80% of these collisions result in either pain or injury. Again, over half of the bicycle collisions within Citrus Heights happen on streets with speed limits of 40 miles per hour. Most of these collisions were from right hooks, but the most severe collisions happened when bicyclists and vehicles were traveling perpendicular to each other, both traveling straight. Unsafe turns or lane changes were also a leading cause of bicycle collisions. Again, we looked at the hotspots for where these collisions are occurring within the city of Citrus Heights. And what you can see on this map here is where those collisions are overlaid with the city's bike network, so where we could expect bicyclists to be traveling. Finally, we looked at vehicle collisions, again, by frequency by year and severity for vehicle collisions. One thing that we do want to note about this figure for severity for vehicle collisions is that the property damage only figure we expect to be actually much higher than is shown in this graphic. And the reason for that is the data for the study comes from all reported collisions. And we expect that a higher number of vehicle collisions where there's only property damage are less likely to be reported. And so this 14.5% of PDO, we would expect to be actually accounting for a higher number of the collisions in citrus heights. Looking at the causes of vehicle collisions, the leading cause was unsafe speed, which was followed by driving under the influence. Again, more than half of vehicle collisions occur on streets with speed limits of 40 miles per hour. The most common type of collisions were rear ends, followed by broadsides. We looked again at the hotspots, so where are the majority of these collisions occurring within Citrus Heights, and could identify some areas of greater concern like Greenback and Mariposa or Antelope and Garden Gate. And with that, we're going to take another quick pause for a poll and for some questions to see if there's any questions we can answer.
Yes, Sarah, thanks. We did have a question regarding right hook. Could you explain a little bit more what you mean by a right hook?
Yeah, absolutely. So a right hook would be when a bicyclist is traveling straight and a car takes a right into the bicyclist.
Thanks. We also had a question on why the crash data is only summarized through 2018. And actually, I can answer that question. And the reason this is due to the time it takes to compile all of the traffic reports into the statewide integrated traffic record system, or otherwise known as SWITRs. Each year, all the police departments and agencies that take collision reports compile all that and send it to the state, who then summarizes it. And that takes about 9 to 12 months to summarize the previous year's reports. So the 2018 data just came out in late 2019, so it's the most recent data that we are using currently for this project. And we have another question about who takes the reports. And I believe they're referring to the collision reports. So I don't know, Sergeant Gualco, if you'd be able to talk about the collision reports and how those are compiled.
Yeah, absolutely. Our officers get dispatched, obviously, to these collisions, and they're the ultimately ones that write these collision reports. There was a comment about how many were calls for service, and some of the property damage only calls for collision services data. And I'll just say that what I have is about 15% of all the collisions are injury, and about 85 of our collisions are property damage only. So, which is a pretty higher number for property damage only collisions. So, hope that answers all that.
Thank you. And that's all the questions we have right now regarding the safety analysis.
Great, thanks, Leslie. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Ian to talk a little bit more about the prioritization process.
Thank you, Sarah. Could we go on to the next slide, please? So the key outcome really of this entire project is this prioritization process. As you can imagine, a lot of requests come in every year from the community for safety improvements. The city has limited budgets to implement these safety measures. So this project is really about creating a prioritization process where the most effective use of public spending can be used on the most important projects. The way that we see this process working out is essentially it's a 4-stage process. So stage 1, the request comes in from the community. Stages 2 and 3 are analytical steps where we assign scores to the request. And the final stage is where the request forms its part within a prioritized list. Next slide, please. So just looking at these requests in a little bit more detail, the graph on the left shows that every year the city receives roughly, well, certainly for the last 2 years, receives roughly 100 requests per year. So how are these requests broken down? A little more than half of the requests concern speeding, and that can come in two forms. So either as a direct request for a speed hump, or then secondly, as a request to reduce speeds in the neighborhood. About 25% of requests relate to signage matters. And from the remaining 20%, it's really a mixture of requests for crosswalks, requests for police enforcement, and requests regarding parking matters. Now, part of this project is really to kind of streamline this request process so that whether the request comes in over the phone or by email or using the web portal, we take down exactly the same information. The key items of information, of course, are the location, and then secondly, the problem itself, be it kind of speeding, enforcement, parking, street lighting, etc. Next slide, please. So moving on to the first analytical step, this is the context criteria assessment. This essentially takes the location of the request together with a whole series of information that the city has to create this context score. And the score would come out as either low, medium, or high. Now, looking at some of the context criteria in the table on the right, we'd like to use things like school zone. So is the location in a school zone? Transit, so is the location close to a regional transit bus stop? Is the location on the bicycle network? Is there a crash history associated with that location? Now, as you can imagine, some of those context criteria are more important than others. Whether there is a crash history with that location, you might think is more important than whether the location is near to a bus stop. So part of this project, part of this process involves weighting these different criteria. To an extent, as far as we can, we're basing this on what we've heard from the community, be it from the online survey or from other events like this one, where we take feedback from the community. Anyway, the outcome, the output from this analytical step is a low, medium, or high score. Sarah, could you move to the next slide, please? So the next step is another analytical step. It's called the needs criteria assessment. This is a little bit more involved for the city. It involves going out into the field and collecting volume and speed information. As you can imagine, it's a little bit more costly as well. Now, what is really important here is that the scores from the previous step, so the context criteria, if a certain measure comes out as medium or high, it will carry on to this step and then have a needs score applied to it. If on the previous step it came through as being low, we will keep hold of the request, but immediately we will not do the needs assessment. It will be done later if those which scored low on the previous step start coming towards the top of the list. So the output from this step, again, is a low, medium, or high score. Sarah, could you move to the next slide, please? So once we have those two scores, we can create an overall score for the request, and the request can then form its part within an overall list of measures. The idea being, of course, that those measures at the top of the list represent more effective use of public spending. Sarah, next slide. So I think at this point, if we could invite any more questions from the community.
Leslie, you're muted.
Thank you. We did have a couple questions. Mary, will people be able to see where their request is on the list in comparison to others?
Yes, they will. The intent of this program is to be equitable and transparent. And once the list has been put together, we will be able to share that upon request.
Thanks. And we have a question regarding requests to the police. Mary, perhaps maybe we could discuss how the requests that go to the police department might be considered in this process.
So there is a little lag in all of the requests coming over to the city's general services department. So for this particular program, we do have all requests that have been input into our database over here in the engineering department. However, there may be some that don't make it over here that are solved at an enforcement level primarily, and thus they don't come over to the engineering department for additional evaluation. So hope that answers your question on that.
Thanks. And we have a question, what about education and enforcement as a method to address some of these concerns? How would that be considered in this? Officer Gualco, if you wanted to start, and then Mary add to that.
I'm sorry, the question one more time.
How is education and enforcement involved in this process? And then how would that be considered as a kind of methodology to address some of these traffic safety concerns that come in?
Yeah, so we take each these traffic safety concerns, we screen them. I screen that at my level. And if it's an enforcement level thing for the police department that can handle, we deploy our officers accordingly into these areas and address the concern with enforcement. Sometimes it's education. If we have a onesie twosie resident in your neighborhood that we can identify, we'll do education that way too. And then others that for other traffic calming measures, we refer those over to the city for to the engineers such as yourself to address those.
Thank you. And we have another question regarding the scoring process. Ian, maybe you can help answer this. How would residential streets work in the prioritization?
So the whole idea is that residential streets are the key to this project rather than the arterial streets. Of course, if a request comes in that is on an arterial street, then that will be logged as well. But the whole tool really is to do with residential streets and prioritizing those requests that do come in on residential streets. The idea also is that this is a very transparent process where residents will be able to see where their request lies within the prioritized list and the scores attributed to it and the scores attributed to other requests. And I suppose the concern of residents will be those requests that are in front on the list. They will be able to see those as well. Does that answer your question?
I hope so. If it doesn't, if the resident who typed it in wants to follow up, please go ahead and do that in the Q&A box. We have another question asking how long it might take to get to step number 1 once a concern or request is submitted to the city. Mary, perhaps you want to discuss that?
So step number 1, I believe, was the receipt of the complaint or the concern. And those are taken and entered in immediately and then processed by the engineering department. So we're looking at those on a regular basis. So I couldn't give you an exact number of days, but we go through these requests on an ongoing process, and we would be responding to the reporting party within a couple of days.
Just in addition to that comment, so the whole idea of the tool is that it takes information that the city already has available. So once it gets to that first analytical stage where a context score is assigned to the request, that should be very, very quick because it uses information that is built within the tool. So as soon as a request comes through, we should automatically be able to have a context-based score for that request.
And just to add to that, those requests that require additional data collection would take longer, but the entering of it, receipt of it, of the concern, and initial processing would take place relatively quickly.
All right, and we have another question. Is it possible to confirm that the scoring process makes residential streets, by definition, very low on priority?
I can take this. So no, that's not the case here. There are, I don't know if you know, but there are separate kind of funding sources for safety improvements on residential streets and safety improvements on arterials. So arterial improvements are funded more from kind of state and federal grants that are administered by Caltrans. Local funding is used for safety improvements on residential streets. The whole idea of this project really is to look at those requests that are coming in on residential streets and prioritize those requests so that the local funding that is available can be used in the most effective way. As I mentioned earlier, requests that come in on arterial streets will be logged and will go into a separate process for prioritization and application for funding through the more normal means for those arterial streets, such as through Caltrans grants.
And I can just add a few examples that you may have noticed on the hotspot map. We have some locations where we have a high incident of pedestrian vehicle conflicts, and that's Sunrise and Old Auburn, and we also have Greenback and Auburn Boulevard. Both of those locations have been identified for outside funding through Caltrans and are in varying places of project development. So Old Auburn Road, we have a complete streets project that was just approved, so we'll be looking at implementing measures along that entire corridor. And at Auburn Boulevard and Greenback Lane, we have a highway safety improvement project program that is going into the construction phase that will install some pedestrian fencing along 3 legs of that intersection to help improve safety for pedestrians. So those are just 2 examples of where we have these larger hotspots that are on arterials. They're outside of the neighborhood areas, and they would be outside of this prioritization program, but we'll still be working on them.
Thanks. And we do have a few more questions on this, but on the interest of time, I think we'll move on. And if there's time at the end, we can come back to some of these additional questions that have come in.
Thanks, Leslie. So now we're going to move on to implementation, and I'm actually going to pass that back to you, Leslie.
Great. So regarding the implementation and next steps of this project, we're currently in the middle of workshop number 2. The online survey will be open again through the end of the month. Any follow-up questions regarding this workshop can also be submitted through the end of the month. This summer in 2020, we'll be reaching out again with a draft report and a draft tool to share. Then we'll have a 3rd community workshop, which will be held to show and discuss those draft items. We anticipate finalizing the report and the tool in the early months of 2021 with the hope to start using it for prioritization and implementation beginning in the spring of 2021. So about a year from now. Questions, feedback, and comments as previously mentioned, can be submitted to the project email at mmtsp@citrusheights.net. And please follow us on social media, sign up for the city e-newsletter, and visit our website to stay up to date on all things related to this project, including the dates and format of our next workshop, which will be again this summer. And Sarah, turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Leslie. So one of the outputs of this project will actually be a neighborhood toolbox with materials that are tailored to be usable by residents. Things like lawn signs or car cleanings or guides on the MMTSP, what it does, what the different countermeasures look like. And so these are going to be developed so that you can have some tools to promote safety within your own neighborhood. These tools were selected based on some of the feedback that we heard from folks at Community Workshop 1, as well as materials that folks indicated they would be interested in receiving through the survey. In addition, Citrus Heights also has some other programs such as Safe Routes to School, which will be developing additional material that can be used to promote safe streets within your own neighborhood. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Mary.
Thank you, Sarah. So I did want to, we're coming to the end of the webinar here pretty soon, and I did want to give a thank you to our neighborhood champions. And these folks who have been with us since the beginning of the project, they have exercised some additional championship qualities by going out and looking at conditions within the neighborhoods. We selected certain areas throughout the city that reflect locations where we've either installed traffic calming measures or maybe there aren't any traffic calming measures, and these folks took a look at what was happening in those locations and provided feedback to us as well. They also committed to being more active throughout the MMTSP process and helping us engage with their neighborhood, maybe their street. And so we just want to do a special shout out to them. So thank you all for those of you who are more active champions out in front, and then all of you who are continually working in your own neighborhoods to champion safety, because it makes a difference for all modes that you're involved. So we really want to thank you for that. And I'll turn it back over to Leslie for some final questions and answers.
Great, thanks, Mary. We have a question regarding education. Does the city provide education to students and residents regarding proper bicycle safety and rules of the road? Sergeant Gualco, perhaps you can start us off with that one.
Yeah, absolutely. So the city, the police department, the San Juan Unified School District partner up multiple times throughout the year for bicycle and traffic safety events. These events include school events like Red Ribbon Week, neighborhood association meetings, some of our community events like Petterpalooza. And during these events, we go over proper bicycle safety and rules of the road for our kids. And this current school year, we've done about 30 of those. And in addition to that, the San Juan Unified School District also puts on an extensive multi-hour, what they call a bike rodeo for our fifth graders. And that's hosted at several of our local elementary schools. And then lastly, if your neighborhood association has interest in any of this, we're interested in hosting one for you or coming out and instructing. So hit us up if you have interest in that.
Great, thank you. We have another question regarding the prioritization list. Will the list include when each item will be? For example, if they're fourth on the list, will they know how long it would take to get to that point on the prioritization list?
I think as we mentioned, you will be able to see the list that will be publicly available. You will be able to see if your request is number 4th, and you will know that. You will be able to see the requests that are also above your request. As regards timescales, it's a little bit difficult to provide information on that. I'm not sure if if Mary could add anything here. I think the idea is that we give as much transparency as we can. Mary?
Right, that's right, Ian. And I think once the list has been developed and we take a look at it, we see what's on it, what the funding is available, then we'll be better able to lay out some timelines. So for sure, we're going to want to let folks know what their expectation of implementation will be, but at the moment right now, we don't have that available.
Thanks. And another question regarding the prioritized list. When will that draft list be able to be reviewed or provided to the residents for consumption? Mary or Ian?
So we'll be, as soon as the tool is finalized, we'll be able to start inputting the data and letting the tool do its work, which would be to provide a list of those locations. So once that's done and it's presented to the city council, then we can certainly have that available. So specific timeline, I would say in the spring of 2021 is when it would certainly be live for sure, and hopefully before then.
And a question regarding the scoring methodology. Is this going to be like you get points for certain things, or is it going to be more of a deductive system where you take away points for certain items?
It would generally work where you attain points, mainly for, well, on the context side. So if your location is in a high kind of collision area, and the other context criteria that we discussed. And then also if the location on the needs side has high volume or high speeds associated with it. But it's an interesting question because maintenance is important. Some of the countermeasures that are involved that will address some of the safety concerns have differing levels of maintenance. It's something that we're considering, and we're working out how to include that in the tool right now. But thank you for your question. It's an interesting one and something that we're currently discussing.
Thank you. Again, if you have questions, please type them into the Q&A box. We have a question: how much does it cost to install a speed hump? And can the neighborhood pay for it on their own? So regarding the cost of speed humps, they cost about $6,000 to $10,000, and it depends really on the width of the road, and that includes the asphalt, that includes the signing and the striping. So they are quite costly. And regarding neighborhoods or anyone else paying for it on their own, it is really hard for the city to do that. It is something that we are looking into, but there is multiple costs involved with any sort of traffic calming measure, and that's the initial installation and the ongoing maintenance of that. So it is something we're looking into on the feasibility of that. We should have more information as we come out further with our draft report and tool. And a lot of the other questions I'm seeing are about specific intersections. And so I will be responding to those directly with those residents, specifically regarding those locations after this meeting within the next few days. So please keep a lookout on that. We did have one more question regarding becoming a champion. Mary, how do you become a champion and why should people do that?
Well, I mean, I think we all have an inner champion that we want to nourish. And so I certainly would recommend that anyone champion safety in our neighborhood. It takes all of us to really make a difference, and only one of us to make a difference. If you want to be more formally involved in the champion your neighborhood, then please see the project website. We have applications available online, and you could submit that, and included in that application is what do you want to do? Do you want to be involved more like the champions that we recognized earlier, and go out and do some field trips and field work and provide some input. If you want to interact with your neighborhood watch or your neighborhood association on a more educational level and show them the toolbox and, you know, kind of be a leader in your neighborhood about implementing some of those yard signs or clings, or, you know, create some type of a neighborhood effort. So those are just some of the ways that you can take your championship to the next level. But we're also looking to find out from you what you think it is to be a champion, and we can absolutely add that to the mix.
It looks like we have a last poll on the screen. And Mary, where can people find this presentation and the video after the webinar is over, if they want to watch it again or if they have a friend who wasn't able to attend?
Yes, please stay engaged. So we have a project website at www.citrusheights.net/945. And we also have a multitude of ways that you can connect with us via Facebook, Twitter. We're on the city's on YouTube, Nextdoor, signing up for our e-notifier services. So those are just, you know, some of the ways that we hope you stay engaged. Anyone who was on this webinar tonight, or you've been at a meeting before and we have a good email address for you, we're always sending out emails about what's upcoming to make sure that you know, you stay tuned, and we hope that you do. Your input is critical to this project. It affects your neighborhoods, and it's being partly shaped by you. So we really appreciate your input. And are there any final questions before we think? Well, look, I'm really pleased to see the ways that everyone is participating and staying engaged. So thank you for that. Stay tuned. We're halfway through, and this is going to be a great product when we're done, and we're just getting started. So thank you. And with that, any final comments from any of the panelists? Okay, well, thank you everyone, and a special thank you to Nicole Baxter and Haley Reed for helping make this possible. And have a great night, everyone. Stay tuned.